Tupac gets killed, who knows? There may have been an LAPD officer right there, 2 cars behind. If you're the chief of police in Los Angeles, do you really want to go digging around in there?
One of Tupac's former bodyguards, who had been acting undercover for a multi-agency task force, confirmed how paperwork revealed the FBI have a videotape of the Tupac crime being carried out. The tape, which had been captured around 24 feet away, being roughly the distance behind the bodyguard's car, which was at the rear of the BMW Tupac was in, is said to contain the crime on tape, including the identification of the suspect. As Dwayne Davis had been charged in the case in 2023 and is now pending trial set for 2026, the tape could prove if the suspect had been his nephew Orlando Anderson, which is the reason he is now in court. The case against Dwayne Davis goes back to a 2008 task force set up by the US government in response to the LAPD being implicated in the unsolved crime of Biggie. Greg Kading and fellow former LAPD partner Darren Dupree had both been chosen to work on a task force. As Dwayne Davis had been reported as having a connection into Biggie's record label boss Puff Daddy, the task force had set him up in a sting operation, which had offered him either partial immunity under a proffer agreement or to remain silent and receive 25 years in prison. Davis now claims, while under duress through the persuasion of Kading, he had fabricated a story of assisting his deceased nephew Orlando Anderson with carrying out the crime on Tupac. Davis had been questioned by the FBI in 1998 while in prison, where he claimed to have had no involvement in the Tupac case. Greg Kading had been on tape mentioning the FBI interview to Davis during his questioning, to which the task force had told Davis that his confession with them could not be like the one with the FBI, otherwise it would result with him going to prison.
We do have to emphasize to you, everything in this report cannot be like that report.
Kading had been removed from the task force after an external investigation into allegations of bribing and intimidating suspects into providing false testimony. Kading had been found on numerous tapes as offering inducements to suspects to pressure testimonies. Davis, who is now in court, claimed this had happened to him, as he had been given the offer of a proffer agreement or 25 years in prison. Davis's confession had been secretly recorded, which Kading had then published in his book and documentary called Murder Rap. Filmmaker R.J. Bond had reported on Sam Tripoli's podcast that Darren Dupree, the LAPD cop who had worked on the task force that had set up Dwayne Davis, had gone on to help Davis with securing a $150,000 deal with the BET network to go on the show Death Row Chronicles and repeat the claims.
That Death Row Chronicles interview was arranged by this Kading guy. Kading's hands are all over it. Darren Dupree, his partner, his hands are all over that Death Row Chronicles interview. Keefe D got $150,000 for doing that interview. He co-signs the book, Kading's book. The guy that interviewed him for Death Row Chronicles was the guy that worked on Kading's documentary Murder Rap, which was based on his book.
Davis, in accepting this deal, which was reported as being brokered by the same LAPD cop who had set him up in the task force, had violated the proffer agreement, landing Davis to have been charged in the Tupac case. If what Davis is putting forward in court turns out to be true, being that of fabricating a story to escape the task force inducement of either 25 years in prison or freedom for information around the cases, this means he would have furthered the lie in order to take the $150,000 deal brokered by the LAPD officer, which, if based off a false narrative like he claims, would have been accepted to become the official scapegoat in the Tupac case. Dwayne Davis's nephew Orlando Anderson, who had been killed in 1998, had claimed in news reports at the time that he was being used as a scapegoat in the case.
I've been thinking, maybe I'm a scapegoat or something. I just want to let everybody know, what I'm saying, I didn't do it.
Orlando Anderson was kind of set up to be the Lee Harvey Oswald of the whole thing.
Suge Knight, being an eyewitness of the crime who was in the seat next to Tupac and had been hit in the head, has claimed in 2 different interviews that Orlando Anderson hadn't been the shooter. He had first said this in a 2018 prison interview with author Michael Douglas Carlin.
And the sad thing about it, Orlando wasn't even the shooter, It's said that, but that's not at all.
After Dwayne Davis had been charged in 2023, TMZ had interviewed Suge Knight, where he had once again claimed the Orlando Anderson narrative was untrue.
Orlando was the shooter, and Keefe was in on it. Is that correct?
No.
Then who shot Tupac?
It wasn't Anderson, so that's all I got to say about that part.
You are saying Orlando was not the shooter. Do I have that right?
1,000%.
Davis's defense have put Suge Knight's claims forward in court, stating an eyewitness has said Davis's claims are a fabrication. Suge Knight in 2 different prison interviews has put forward a different suspect, which he had named as an LAPD officer. In relation to Suge saying Orlando Anderson was not the shooter in his 2018 interview, he would go on to expand and name former LAPD Rampart cop Rafael Perez as alleged to have been involved in the crime.
Perez and them was all involved. They were trying to kill me too.
In a 2025 interview with Piers Morgan, Suge claimed the same crooked cops had been behind both the Tupac and Biggie cases.
Those same crooked cops, they cost Tupac Shakur and Biggie Smalls their life.
He claimed there was a contract hit out on him and Tupac, and there had been more than one shooter.
It was a murder for hire hit. It was blocked in. It was more than one shooter. Crooked cops destroyed hip-hop.
Puffy's former bodyguard Gene Deal claimed on the podcast Anything Goes with James English that he had been told by an eyewitness on the scene of the Tupac crime that there was more than one shooter.
Nobody gonna ever believe it. It wasn't only a driver that killed Tupac. I was told by somebody who was there that somebody ran up on the car and shot Tupac. I told with a female, she said Suge Knight told her the same thing.
The FBI tape would be the smoking gun in the Dwayne Davis case, as it would show proof as to whether or not Orlando Anderson had been the shooter. The FBI would have to be subpoenaed to provide the tape to the courts for the use of evidence. However, in the past, they refused to release 97% of their 4,000-plus page FBI file on Tupac, stating for reasons of national security. Therefore, if the tape contained LAPD officers as multiple shooters as Suge Knight had stated, then the tape will ultimately remain classified. In this video, we're going to take a look into the secret FBI tape of the Tupac incident and the investigation surrounding it as to why they were recording them. The FBI had begun a multi-agency investigation against Suge Knight, being after the release of Dr. Dre's The Chronic in 1992. Suge Knight had generated $150 million within a year through the launch of his company Death Row Records, which the FBI believed had been involved in racketeering.
The very first year, I generated $150 million.
The agency and a joint task force with the ATF had begun an investigation to look into money laundering, arms trafficking, racketeering, homicide, and government influence. The investigation against the company became public in 1996, following 4 years of covert surveillance which included tailing, recording, and tapping communications of Suge Knight's personal and office telephones. Suge had hired Milton Grimes to represent him in the criminal racketeering investigation. The investigation spanned over a decade, concluding in 2002. Kevin Hackey was a former Compton School District cop who had been approached by the multi-agency task force in order to act as an asset and go undercover to infiltrate the company. The task force in investigating Death Row discovered Hackey had a connection to the head of security Reggie Wright Jr., who had been a former Compton cop. Kevin Hackey had once been Reggie Wright Jr.'s police partner, therefore the agency saw this as an advantage with Hackey in being able to get the in and make the perfect asset to infiltrate the company.
Hackey, according to these court filings, worked for 2 years as an undercover agent for the FBI and ATF, helping the feds.
To investigate Marion Knight and Death Row Records for racketeering violations.
Hackey had then gotten a job with Rightway Security, which had been a company Reggie Wright Jr. started from a loan of $300,000 by Suge Knight in order to provide the company with police protection. Hackey would be seen in several videos and pictures as bodyguard in Tupac, all while he was reporting information back to his federal handlers. Hackey would go on to be discovered as an asset for the feds, just days after the Tupac incident had taken place. The discovery had been made in a hospital while Tupac was in the ICU. Police reports reveal hospital staff had witnessed Hackey as using the hospital phone to call his federal handlers, where he had been updating them on Tupac's condition. He was also reported as attempting to use his federal credentials to gain access to the hospital. Hackey had stayed in the same room as Tupac's father, a former Black Panther member Billy Garland, on the night Tupac had passed away, where he continued to report back to his federal handlers. Kevin Hackey in the 2002 documentary Biggie and Tupac would go on to reveal his undercover ties and had made claims to have seen paperwork which stated the FBI had both the Tupac and Biggie murders on tape. The multi-agency task force had employed multiple undercover assets and had also turned Suge's employees into becoming federal witnesses against him. Hackey claimed in an interview with the YouTube channel Bomb First that he had been played several of the wiretaps as part of his role in the operation, with him claiming the audio had been very suspicious from people within the company in the days leading up to the Tupac incident. Hackey would claim in the 2002 Biggie and Tupac documentary that he believes he had been set up by the agency after revealing the information about the paperwork, which revealed the FBI had the unsolved crimes on tape. Hackey claimed to have been set up in a sting operation by them where he had served jail time. The multi-agency task force in their investigation had pressed tax charges against Suge Knight and his lawyer David Kenner. As part of a plea bargain, they had both paid in total $120,000 in fines, with no criminal charges being given for the violations. We will now take a look into the investigations for each crime the agency had been looking into. The task force had been looking into money laundering connected to Suge Knight and his company Death Row Records. The investigation had been looking into the financial startup of Death Row, which they believe may have came from two kingpins being Michael Harry-O Harris and Ricardo Crockett. Suge Knight has been pictured visiting Harry-O in prison. Harry-O had been a Californian kingpin who had been expanding into the entertainment industry before being sent to prison in the late 80s.
Harris built an organization that distributed in California, Arizona, Texas, Michigan, Illinois, Iowa, Indiana, Missouri, Louisiana, Florida, and New York. Major Colombian drug kingpins like Mario Villabona were obliged to deal directly with Harris. But like a mob godfather, Harris sought to legitimize his illicit fortune and gain Beverly Hills respectability.
Harris had produced a play called Checkmates, which had introduced Denzel Washington to the industry. Harry-O, in a 2001 documentary Welcome to Death Row, had claimed to have been a financier of Death Row Records.
When I asked the question to Suge, what does it actually take? He told me that we could be 50-50 partners for about $1.5 million.
Reggie Wright Jr., the former head of security for the label, had claimed in a Vlad TV interview that Harris had brokered a deal using money from Compton kingpin Pat Johnson in order to go towards the startup of Death Row.
Pat Johnson, a guy that was one that was allegedly supposed to have been Suge's front money. You know, Harry-O get the credit, but actually it was Pat Johnson, PJ. Suge only give him credit for about $500,000.
So what was Harry-O's involvement exactly?
He was the broker.
Pat Johnson was the plug to Southside Compton Crip Dwayne Davis, who claimed to have transported a portion of the money to Harry-O's lawyer David Kenner in Compton.
My partner that was in the feds with Harry-O, he's in the background on that, but Harry-O was like the front man. Dr. Dre took the deal. They gave him like $200,000. My homeboy came to pick up the money in our neighborhood, so I went out there, looked in the car. It was the dude, David Kenner.
The illegitimate money was roughly a 30-70 split between Harris and Johnson, as Harris was said to have provided $1 million, with Johnson providing the additional $500,000. Harry-O claimed as part of the deal, Suge Knight would have to take on David Kenner as his attorney, and Death Row would be a subsidiary of Harris's company, Godfather Entertainment.
What I suggested to David and Suge is that I do not include him in the corporation, and that these guys could go ahead and the actual upfront managing and representing of the company. Kenner started off as my guy, watching my back, supposedly, and Lydia was also there to represent my percentage of GF Entertainment, which we decided would be the parent company, Death Row.
The prisoner's money was then said to have been used to host a Death Row Records brand launch party at Chasen's in February of 1992. The videographer at the event had their tape confiscated by the FBI, which had Kenner on tape mentioning Harry-O.
The label started with Dr. Dre, who was going to do his own thing, and with a lot of help from Suge Knight and Harry-O and a number of people, and we got it all together.
And that's on tape, and the FBI confiscated that from me.
The illegitimate money was then said to have also been used to hire Solar Records recording studio, being the place where Dr. Dre's debut album The Chronic had been produced, which had generated over $50 million in sales alone. This then introduced the aspect of money laundering, as several music companies had helped wash the money. One of these companies had included Sony, which was run by Tommy Mottola at the time, as Sony had been in a joint venture with Solar Records by Dick Griffey. Therefore, the money given given to Solar from Death Row for the studio had then been being kicked back to Sony, with it initially coming from the Kingpins. Interscope Records had also got caught up in the money laundering, as they had become Death Row's distributor through Priority Records. Hario in the Welcome to Death Row documentary claimed to have been shown corporation paperwork by David Kenner, which revealed Kenner had set up a different Death Row Records company which removed Hario's Godfather Entertainment as a subsidiary. Allegations of poisoning towards Hario get brought up at this meeting, as it's reported Kenner had given him a can of Sprite soft drink, to which Hario had been rushed to hospital from something he had ingested.
I got a call. They told me that Mike was in like a wheelchair. His mouth was twisted. I mean, he couldn't even walk. He couldn't even use his hands. And I asked Mike, I said, well, did, Kenner give you anything?
David is as smooth as you want to be and as vicious as you want to be, given the scenario.
Hario claimed during his time while he was in hospital, his signature had been forged on incorporation paperwork.
When they ultimately got ready to sign the deal with Vanoscope, Kenner, Dre, and Suge suspended my GF Music Death Row, started the fraudulent Death Row, and transferred my assets to the fraudulent company. What happened is I went to the hospital, almost died from something I ingested. So while I was in the hospital incapacitated, a fraudulent settlement release agreement was made that I never signed, never approved. In hindsight, it was clear that I needed to be out of the way.
The investigation revealed Suge Knight was alleged to have had a person who worked at the DMV who had been an expert at forging signatures and also provided fake IDs. Kevin Hackey had told the FBI that Suge Knight was alleged to have been involved in at least one money laundering operation which Hackey had been aware of, which had been laundering $80,000 per month. Former Compton cop Arnie Villaruel on his YouTube channel had revealed more information about a business in Compton which the FBI had bugged, being as part of their investigation into money laundering by Death Row. The cop claimed there had been an auto stereo shop on Olandra Boulevard in Compton, which the FBI believed Death Row had been using in a money laundering operation. The cop stated it was the shop on an intersection between Olandra Boulevard and Atlantic Avenue in Compton, which today there are two adjacent auto shops at that location. The owner at the time the cop had claimed was called Harold. The cop claimed to have been made aware that the FBI had bugged the place under part of their investigation against Death Row. While on a stakeout doing surveillance on the shop, the cop claimed to have seen Reggie Wright Jr. and Reggie Wright Sr. enter the shop with a briefcase which they didn't leave with. Reggie Wright Sr. was the head of Compton's gang division in Compton PD. The cops on the stakeout had then raided the shop and had arrested a man called Derek who was found with narcotics. After interrogating him, the cops claimed the suspect began to cry, claiming he couldn't give up information or he would be killed.
That stereo place that was on Alondra near Atlantic, that was a money laundering location for the record company. The FBI, I guess they had that place under surveillance to see who's coming in and out of that auto stereo place. The feds are watching that place, man, because of money laundering. So all of a sudden we see a two-door red Lexus pull up. So we see Junie and Reggie, his dad, come out of the car. They got a briefcase. They were in there for about 30 minutes. They come out, no briefcase. We arrest some dude in there, deloaded. Derek, he starts crying. And he says, man, if I tell you right now, they're gonna kill me. I'm gonna end up dead.
The federal task force had gone on to turn Suge Knight's prior accountant Steve Cantrock into a federal witness under their investigation into money laundering. Steve Cantrock had worked for the New York-based firm Coopers & Lybrand and had been hired by Suge Knight to become a business manager in 1993. In the summer of 1996, Suge believed Cantrock had been skimming money amounting to around $4 million. Suge Knight and David Kenner would further use the accountant as an excuse for unpaid bills to American Express in a lawsuit. Steve Cantrock had become a federal witness and was put into hiding out the country paid for by Coopers & Lybrand after he had given information to the task force about Suge Knight. Cantrock told the task force that Suge Knight had set up a meeting with him at Death Row artist Michelle's San Fernando Valley property. Cantrock claimed Suge had been with David Kenner and Pyru gang members. Cantrock alleged Suge Knight had assaulted him while there and had forced him into signing a false confession admitting to stealing $4 million. A security guard was posted in the lobby at the LA offices of Coopers & Lybrand, where the receptionist had told callers that Cantrock had been away on stress leave. Cantrock told the US Justice Department he would supply them with reams of documents detailing Death Row's financial dealings over the past 3 years. The money laundering investigation had concluded ended after the US Attorney's Office had issued a statement saying there would be no prosecution by the task force for money laundering. The classified FBI documents released on their investigation into the Biggie case attached a money laundering into an audit which Tupac was carrying out on death row. The files read, quote, Redacted owed Tupac around $10 million. Tupac and others began complaining about Redacted and all the money he owed them. It is alleged from several sources that Redacted owed Tupac millions of dollars from royalties and that Tupac was soon going to be leaving death row and blow the whistle on Redacted and his drug activities, unquote. Tupac had been contractually under an amended contract with Interscope, which granted him $1.4 million in bail money for his release from prison in 1995. Tupac would then make music with Death Row Records. Suge Knight claimed in a 2025 prison interview with the YouTube channel The Art of Dialogue that Tupac was never signed to Death Row. He claimed instead that Interscope was only offering Tupac 8 points as part of his contract. Points are a term for percentage points of money made from royalties. A contract which Tupac had signed with Death Row, however, revealed how royalties would be granted to Tupac from Death Row in 1996 at 18 points, showing an additional 1% for every time a project would go gold or platinum. Further documentation from Death Row's accounts revealed that Tupac was set to receive a royalty payment in October of 1996 for $4 million. It has been proven that Tupac was not contractually signed to Death Row, as the deal which had granted Tupac his bail money had been provided by Interscope, which had come from Tupac's Me Against the World album, which had been at #1 while he was in prison. A royalties contract document does exist, however, between Tupac and Death Row. Suge Knight did admit in his Art of Dialogue interview that although Tupac was not contractually signed to Death Row, both Interscope and Death Row had been invested in payments to Tupac for the work provided. Tupac had filed an audit on Death Row in the last 2 weeks of August of 1996.
The last 3 weeks of his life on a one-note crusade. Suge, I want to see an accounting of my money. And that's basically where Tupac was at the time that he died.
The filing was under the claims of withheld royalty payments, failure to deliver advance payments, and mishandling of financial accounts. Attorneys found at the time in August of 96, $13 million worth of disposable unpaid cash had been being withheld by Death Row Records as available payouts to artists. The audit's investigation had discovered Tupac was being charged $3,000 in child support for Nate Dogg's child, being a different artist on Death Row. Tupac was also found to have been being charged over $100,000 by a leasing company owned by Suge Knight, which had been expenses and gifts of jewelry from Suge Knight charged back to Tupac. Tupac's auntie Gloria had claimed that this same leasing company had been used against Tupac anytime he would ask about the finances. She claimed when Tupac would question Suge about it, the leasing company would give Tupac jewelry and cars to keep him quiet. These were then being charged back to Tupac by the leasing company under expenses.
He asked over and over and over and over again for accountings of the things that he did, of the monies that came in and never got him. And when he screamed loud enough, I'm told, someone would bring over a car and say, Tupac, here's a Rolls Royce. And then when he died, you found out none of it was his.
Tupac was in $5 million worth of personal debt, with him having just $105,000 in his bank. Tupac was also $2 million unrecouped, owing Death Row for production costs. Tupac's mother, Afeni, and her attorney had gone on the news talking about the missing money after filing a lawsuit against Death Row.
I discovered he had next to zero, next to nothing. I discovered that the home that he had thought that he had just bought was not his.
Afeni Shakur now wants to know whether her son Tupac was cheated out of his money by a man he had come to trust, Marion Suge Knight.
Yasmin Fula, who managed Tupac's business affairs and had been assisting with the audit, had requested access to Tupac's master records, but had been denied by Death Row's lawyer David Kenner.
And now Tupac's mother says not only is her son's money missing, but more importantly, the master recordings of the some 200 songs he wrote and sang, potentially worth hundreds of millions of dollars.
We don't know where the masters are because we can't get an accounting.
Tupac had then attempted to leave with his masters from a Can-Am recording studio session, but he had been stopped from doing so by security, who had been informed by Suge Knight not to let anyone take masters. The 2007 documentary Tupac Assassination, Conspiracy or Revenge puts information forward that the masters may have been being mortgaged from Interscope, who had been listed in paperwork as Death Row's creditors. The multi-agency task force had also been investigating Death Row for racketeering violations. The company had numerous racketeering lawsuits filed against them. The first racketeering lawsuit against Death Row had been filed by Eazy-E in 1992. Dr. Dre had been signed to Ruthless Records by Eazy-E, but through the assistance of Suge Knight, Eazy-E had signed release papers, therefore extricating Dr. Dre from Ruthless, with him going on to start Death Row with Suge Knight. Numerous other artists such as Misha Lay had also been removed from Ruthless and moved to Death Row. Eazy-E filed a lawsuit against Death Row and Solar Records along with Sony. The lawsuit had been filed under various incidents of racketeering, extortion and money laundering, being in connection with a contractual dispute between Ruthless and Sony Music. It claimed additional violations of the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act known as RICO. The lawsuit was detailed in the 2001 Welcome to Death Row documentary.
Eric Wright, Eazy-E, filed a RICO lawsuit against them. It was the first time RICO had been used in the music business. RICO is a racketeering lawsuit. It's the thing that they use to get the Mafia when they can't get the Mafia leaders on anything else.
The suit had alleged Sony had interfered with contractual arrangements made by Ruthless after Eazy had been lured to the offices of Solar Records in a joint venture with Sony, where he had been forced under duress into signing release papers. He had alleged acts of violence had taken place within the office, claiming the location protected and facilitated Suge Knight's threats with baseball bats in order to intimidate Eazy-E into signing the release papers under duress. Eazy-E's lawyers had alleged that Sony's deposits of the proceeds from Death Row had been money laundering, being from Sony's joint venture with Solar.
Eazy-E's lawsuit contended that there was money laundering, extortion, threats, and violent intimidation. Not only was it charged against Suge and Death Row for stealing what was their top producer, Dr. Dre, it was charged against Sony Music.
The lawsuit had postponed the release of Dr. Dre's The Chronic album, as it was originally planned to have been distributed by Sony, but following the lawsuit, they had pulled out of the deal. Therefore, the album had been stalled until Interscope had offered a distribution deal through Priority Records. Death Row had also been subjected to a racketeering lawsuit by Afeni Shakur. It accused Suge Knight and David Kenner of a pattern of fraud and deception in their dealings with Tupac. Afeni had discovered that Tupac's album All Eyes on Me had generated over $60 million for Death Row, but Tupac only received $1 million in royalties. The royalties contract granted Tupac 18 points with an additional 1 point for each time a project would go platinum. The points were worth $80,000 for every million copies sold. Tupac's 1996 album All Eyes on Me was a double album, therefore counting as two projects. The album had sold 5 million copies in less than a year, being at $28.99 per copy. The album generated over $140 million in revenue, which had been 50-50 split between Death Row and Interscope. Tupac, based on the royalty agreement paperwork, had been owed $9.2 million in royalties. The FBI files when documenting the Audit and Racketeering investigation had revealed that Death Row owed Tupac around $10 million in royalties. The task force had also been investigating the company for arms trafficking. Kevin Hackey had reported to his federal handlers that he had heard Suge Knight discussing an operation to distribute assault rifles. Suge Knight had been placed on federal probation in 1994, being due to an arms trafficking operation which was alleged to have been being ran with Ricardo Crockett. Suge Knight revealed in the Collect Call podcast by Breakbeat Media that during the time of the Chronic Tour in 1993, he had a conversation with an individual who had been an associate of Ricardo Crockett in order to acquire guns for Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg for them to take them on the tour for protection. Ricardo Crockett had been a Las Vegas kingpin who had been found guilty in 1994, which resulted in over 24 people going to prison due to their connection into a large-scale operation. One of Crockett's associates was alleged to have been found in an arms trafficking operation to Death Row Records, being directly connected to Suge Knight. Suge had been stopped by the police in Beverly Hills with a gun found in his glove compartment, which was found to have been purchased illegally through the arms operation with Ricardo Crockett. Suge Knight was convicted of transporting guns across state lines, but he had won a grant of probation in federal court. Suge in a Collect Call podcast had claimed that the gun had been for Dr. Dre, which was intended for him to take on a Chronic tour.
Dre's business manager is the one going to send the money for a gun he wants. I get him the business manager number. The guy calls the business manager. The business manager wires the money for Dre some guns to the guy who was giving the guns. A year or two later, On my birthday, they arrested me.
The ATF, through the Multi-Agency Task Force, may have also have been running an arms trafficking operation known as gun walking through death row. Tupac's former group artist Napoleon had revealed on his podcast in 2021 that Kevin Hackey had been their connection into bulletproof vests, and had also have been selling guns inside of death row. As Hackey had been found as working as an asset for the FBI and ATF, Napoleon theorized this could have been an operation by the ATF known as gun walking, where the agency supplied groups with weapons to keep track of them.
There was a guy named Hackey. He was a security guard. Come to find out, he was an undercover ATF, but he was selling guns to us. He was selling us guns, bro.
Was that the undercover purpose of it, though? Or
I don't know if that was saying sell them the guns. Maybe that they were saying sell them the guns so we can keep track of them.
Yeah.
But he was selling us guns, and also he had a connection to bulletproof vests.
Hackey reported on the 4th of July of 1996, when Tupac was set to perform at the House of Blues, he had run a tracking operation on one of the guns of Tupac's group artist Fatal of the Outlaws. An off-duty Santa Monica cop had confiscated a Glock off of Fatal when he was entering the venue of the House of Blues. Hackey claimed Reggie Wright Jr. had told him to collect the gun from the Santa Monica Police Department. Hackey had then given a gun to his federal handlers who had ran ballistics tests on it, where they had then given it back to Hackey, who had given it to Reggie Wright Jr. Hackey, in a 2007 Fox News interview, claimed he believed it would go on to be the murder weapon of Tupac.
I was contacted by Reggie to go over to Santa Monica Police Department to pick up this firearm.
Hackey says he first showed the handgun to his FBI handlers and then turned it over to Reggie Wright Jr. A month later in Las Vegas, investigators say it was a .40 Glock handgun that killed Tupac Shakur. Hackey believes the murder weapon was the same gun he gave Reggie Wright Jr.
I believe it is.
The arms trafficking investigation had an informant come forward about assault rifles, claiming to have witnessed Suge Knight unloading a trunk full of AK-47s to Piru gang members in Nickerson Gardens. Raid footage on death row property showed evidence of the arms trafficking operation.
Mac 11 9mm semi-automatic pistol, 100 round AK-47 slip.
Hackey claimed to have been set up by the task force after they supplied him with a large amount of AK-47s which he had been selling, to which he was then pulled over and discovered to have had them in his trunk, for which he had gotten jail time for.
Hackey claims he was betrayed by the FBI. He wasn't given the promotion he was promised, and they then let him languish in jail. Hackey was incarcerated for having a trunk full of AK-47s.
This could suggest that ATF was supplying the AK-47s, which the informant alleged had been given to the Pirus in Nickerson Gardens by death row. Kevin Hackey revealed the FBI had also been investigating the company due to believed ties into several homicides.
The evidence seized regarding homicide and conspiracy to commit homicide.
Snoop Dogg, while under death row in 1993, had been involved in the murder of 20-year-old Philip Poldemariam. Publication series Great American Trials claimed that while Snoop Dogg and Dr. Dre had been filming a music video, a Crip gang member called Philip Poldemariam had arrived at the video shoot, where he had brandished a weapon at Snoop Dogg before being escorted off the set. Snoop Dogg was a member of the Long Beach Crips under the Rolling 20s in LA, while Philip Poldemariam was a member of the Buy-Yourself Hustler Crips based in Palms. The two Crip sets had been at war, provoking Philip Poldemariam to arrive at the video shoot. Philip Poldemariam was then reported as appearing outside Snoop's apartment with the Crips on August 25, 1993, where they began to argue with Snoop's friend Sean Abrams when he had arrived. Poldemariam's friends had stated that Snoop and his bodyguard McKinley Lee, along with Sean Abrams, were alleged to have followed or chased them to Woodbine Park, being a territory of the Buy-Yourself Hustler Crips. Philip Poldemariam had been shot to death at the scene, with an autopsy revealing the wounds had indicated he had been running away from Snoop's Jeep when it occurred. The Chaos Merchants book by author Michael Douglas Carlin and former LAPD detective Russell Paul claimed straight after the shooting, Suge Knight had been updated on what had occurred, who had then told David Kenner, with the book claiming Kenner then went into cover-up mode, having the Jeep wiped down for all evidence and left abandoned and reported as stolen. Suge Knight, in a 2021 interview from prison, revealed how lawyers had briefed him on how there would be a slim chance of Snoop beating the case, being due to the bullets used in the crime.
All the lawyers head down, said we can't beat this case. I said, why not? They said the security has a 9mm. Snoop has a 380. Allegedly, he shot on the ground, the bullet hit the ground, and it killed him, right?
The bullets found were 380 bullets, which were Snoop's gun, with Suge revealing the first argument was going to be that Snoop had shot at the floor, which had then ricocheted and hit Philip. Snoop Dogg's bodyguard had a 9mm, which was able to fire 380 bullets. Therefore, a second argument to then place Snoop's bodyguard behind the murder weapon using Snoop's bullets.
Instead, the bodyguard has got to tell him he was shooting 380 bullets out of a 9mm. But a 380 can't shoot 9mm bullets, but a 9mm can shoot 380 bullets.
Suge Knight, in a Collect Call podcast in 2023, claimed he had to pay off some of Snoop's friends involved in the case, as they had gone to a private investigator and had their testimony recorded, where they were on tape saying Snoop Dogg had been the triggerman.
One of Snoop guys, I ain't gonna say no name, and Snoop know this, he wanted a few dollars. So since he says he didn't give the guy the money, he called the DA. The DA put him with the PI. This guy is going to testify that Snoop the one shot the dude and killed him. He recorded him. I heard it for myself.
Death Row Records had also been associated to the unsolved case of Bruce Richardson. Bruce Richardson was one of Suge Knight's friends from high school and had also been an LA kingpin who had invested his money into the music business. Bruce owned his own record label and had signed Tupac's rap group The Outlaws when they were known as Dromicidal. The artist featured on Tupac's album All Eyes on Me, being his first album released under Death Row. Bruce Richardson had confronted Suge Knight in Bar 1 in Hollywood in May of 1996, being over the royalties owed to him from his artists appearing on the album, which had already have been out for 3 months. Dwayne Davis, who had been at the bar at the time, described witnessing Bruce Richardson beat up Suge Knight and his Compton Mob Pyro enforcer Alton Buntry McDonald.
That boy Bruce Richardson beat that. It wasn't good for them, both of them. Dude, boom, boom. They lost, dude.
Napoleon, who was a member of Dromicidal, which became the Outlaws, who was signed to Bruce Richardson, also claimed Suge Knight and Buntry had gotten beaten up by Bruce. Bruce Richardson was then murdered on his doorstep in an unsolved case 2 weeks later. When investigators arrived, they had found a safe had been opened and looted, which had contained Bruce Richardson's music business contracts. Kevin Hackey claimed it was alleged to have been Compton Mob Pyru members Alton Buntry McDonald and Roger Neckbone Williams who had carried out the hit. Hackey had been present at the 1995 unsolved murder of Kelly Jameson. Kelly Jameson was a 28-year-old Crip from Tragnew Park of the Rolling 60s Crips. Kelly Jameson and 3 other Crips had attended a private party hosted by Death Row at the El Rey Theatre, which was taking place after the Soul Train Music Awards in March of 1995. DJ Quick was a treetop Pyru who was being managed by Suge Knight. Kelly Jameson got into an argument with the Pyrus at the party, which had then resulted in him being beaten to death. Kevin Hackey was present at the murder scene and had told his federal handlers that off-duty LAPD officers had been working without permits at the party and assisted in the murder's cover-up. Hackey claimed that officers had not only failed to rescue Kelly Jameson, but had also all left the theatre without identifying themselves to uniformed cops on the scene, and also never reported being present when Jameson was killed. Police reports of an anonymous witness claimed DJ Quick was the first to attack Jameson by first throwing a chair then striking with a champagne bottle, to which the witness claimed Pyrus, DJ Quick, Jake Robles and Buntry had then stomped him out on the ground. The witness described Suge Knight as cheering on the Pyrus to stomp out the Crip. The investigation was hampered due to lack of cooperation by Death Row and its associates, and no charges were ever filed with it remaining unsolved. The LA Times reported that Death Row had been subjected to a federal investigation into alleged ties with organized crime figures in New York and Chicago. Kevin Hackey had told his federal handlers that David Kenner was the brains of the company, who was alleged to have provided connections to the organized crime families on the East Coast.
David Kenner was a criminal attorney. He did a lot of mafia cases.
I always felt that David Kenner was for David Kenner.
David Kenner was the shadow who was always at Death Row. He was the one who was making deals. David Kenner was running it from the start. He was always there. But I wouldn't say that he's a righteous person.
From a business standpoint, he was ruthless.
David Kenner was the best friend of Dominic Brooklier's son, Tony Brooklier. Dominic Brooklier became the boss of the Los Angeles Mafia in 1974. Kenner had hooked Suge Knight up with Las Vegas attorney John Spilotro, whose father Tony the Ant Spilotro had been a high-ranking member of the Chicago Mafia in the 1970s. Suge Knight had also done business with Oscar Goodman, who was an attorney billing himself as the mouthpiece for the mob and represented the most important mafioso members who were charged with crimes in Nevada. Goodman's partner, being the former U.S. Attorney David Chesnoff, had become Suge Knight's financial advisor with Steve Steiner. David Chesnoff and David Kenner belonged to the same fraternal lodge. Kenner had then owned Kentron, which controlled all the monetary accounts of Death Row subsidiaries, with one such being Nightlife Management run by Suge Knight's ex-wife.
My business was garbage back then, Death Row Records. I let them control everything because I trusted them and I felt like they wouldn't do me wrong. They put me in the game. Business accounts was his accounts, manager was his wife. Imagine all of that shit being twisted up like an octopus.
Therefore, David Kenner, David Chesnoff, and Steve Steiner had been behind most of the monetary accounts of death row. Ronan Rowe's book Have Gun Will Travel, as well as Randall Sullivan's Labyrinth book, both document an alleged connection between Suge Knight and the Genovese crime family. The Genovese crime family were one of the 5 families of New York. During the time of Suge Knight's alleged connection into the Genovese crime family, it had been being ran by Vincent Gigante. The books which covered Suge Knight's alleged connection into the Genovese family alleged David Kenner had introduced Suge Knight to made members of the family in the early 1990s. Allegations were also made tying the family into the arms trafficking operation attached to death row. This could have been through the alleged operation with Ricardo Crockett, as the Genovese family were one of the last crime families prominent in Las Vegas in the 1990s. The declassified FBI files also mention the Genovese crime family. Steve Cantrock, the accountant who had become a federal witness, had introduced Suge Knight to Colombo mob associate Robert Amira. Amira had been indicted with Joseph Colombo Jr. and Alphonse Dewell Marola being in a scheme to defraud the Dunes Hotel and an airline ticket scam. With the Colombo mob associates Robert Amira's assistance, Suge Knight was able to invest in a Las Vegas nightclub known as Botany's. The previous owner had been convicted for helping the Chicago mob skim money from the Stardust Hotel. The building was then acquired by a Las Vegas businesswoman called Helen Thomas, who had gone into business with Suge Knight through Robert Amira. The club was reopened as Club 662, which spells out mob on a keypad. The feds were making it difficult for Suge to obtain permits and a liquor license at the club. This is real FBI surveillance footage carried out on the venue. Kevin Hackey in a 2007 Fox News interview had claimed that one of the investigations had been to look into Suge Knight's ties into US officials such as Omar Bradley. Omar Bradley is an American politician who had served as the mayor of Compton from 1993 to 2001. Omar Bradley and Suge Knight had done business together in investing into youth programs in Compton. This included Suge paying to have a gym room built in Centennial High School in Compton. The FBI were investigating if death row had been paying off or bribing politicians in Compton. Reggie Wright Jr., the former Compton cop and head of death row security, who was a documented 302 informant for the FBI, had told the FBI that death row had attempted to bribe Omar Bradley. Omar Bradley had been in a battle with shutting down the Compton Police Department for means of corruption. The investigation into the Compton Police Department, which had gone on to have been disbanded, had revealed a weapon had passed through death row which was used to shoot Long Beach police officer Brian Watt. The investigation revealed that the weapon had been taken from the Compton Police Department's evidence locker. The FBI, as part of their investigation, questioned Omar Bradley about it due to the suspicious nature around the weapon. A report was then created called the Compton Police Corruption Report, which revealed the weapon was on paper as being booked into evidence. However, it had been removed and was believed to have been involved in the alleged arms trafficking operation mentioned earlier. The report ties the Compton Police into the arms trafficking operation, with the ATF and organized crime as well as LA street gangs alleged to have been involved. The ATF were alleged to have been supplying Hackey with weapons, who had then been selling them into death row, including the Compton Mob Piru street gang, which would then end up in Compton Police's evidence locker for it to then be recycled in the arms trafficking operation. The weapon, which was under investigation by the FBI, which had shot Officer Brian Watt, had ended up in the hands of a gang member called Aaron Heflin through the arms trafficking operation, to which the officer had been shot at 5 times. There were almost 300 unsolved murders in Compton by the time Omar Bradley had disbanded the Compton PD. It was found at Lincoln Memorial Park Cemetery that bodies had been being unearthed for remains of unsolved cases to be intermingled with, making it difficult to track which bodies had belonged to the unsolved cases. Bodies had been being dumped at the cemetery, which included that of Vance Buchanan. Vance was a Piru gang member who had been tortured on video by people dressed in police uniforms, who had handcuffed Vance then finished him off on video. The case, which involved people dressed in police uniforms carrying out the crime on tape, remains unsolved. Suge Knight's Compton Mob Piru enforcer Alton Bunchy McDonald was accused of having a viewing party of the tape, which people believe had resulted in his own demise. He was killed in a truck registered to Reggie Wright Jr. Dwayne Davis alleged in an interview with filmmaker R.J. Bond that it was known in Compton that death row were alleged to have had a murder for hire service within Compton PD. The corruption report would further allege that officers had been found as stealing narcotics out the evidence locker for resale. There was believed to be a large-scale operation from the missing evidence of narcotics being transported to Las Vegas. Thousands of weapons were found to have gone missing from evidence, which were then alleged to have been being used for arms trafficking. Omar Bradley would remark that there had been no difference between death row and the Compton Police Department.
There was a very strong relationship between Death Row Records, several local police departments, and the Compton PD.
Omar Bradley would result in disbanding the Compton PD. A hit was believed to have been put out on Omar Bradley due to the decision, which had mistakenly taken the life of Gary Beverly. Omar Bradley and former Compton police had attended an open public council meeting regarding the corruption of the department. Eric Perridon, a Compton cop who had once been Reggie Wright Jr.'s patrol partner, had gone on to become an assistant district attorney. Author Michael Douglas Carlin claimed Perridon was financed by Reggie Wright Jr. through money from death row, being during his campaign to become assistant district attorney. Perridon had attended the public council meeting to argue against Omar Bradley's decision to disband the Compton PD. Omar Bradley claimed Eric Perridon was alleged to have made a cutthroat gesture towards him at the meeting. The following day, Omar Bradley's work partner Gary Beverly, who was a former principal of a Linwood High School, had been gunned down on a Gardena freeway in Compton. The case still remains unsolved. People believe Gary Beverly's murder may have been mistaken identity for Omar Bradley. Omar stated when the murder had happened, he'd received a call from Reggie Wright Sr. asking him if he was okay. Omar claimed to have received another call 5 minutes later from Reggie Wright Sr., where he had informed him about the murder and had asked about an alibi. Omar had met with an eyewitness to the murder who claimed to have been intimidated by Compton police. The Compton police claimed to have found no evidence or witnesses in the crime. The FBI investigation into death row's connection into officials had looked into Suge Knight's relationship with District Attorney Lawrence Longo. The Deputy District Attorney had been introduced to Suge Knight through David Kenner and had been helping Suge as early as 1992. He had handled a case Suge Knight had caught at the Solar Records studio in 92 after Suge had assaulted two men who had been using a phone which was reserved for Harry O in prison. Suge cut a record deal in 1996 with Longo's 18-year-old daughter, who was set to be the first white artist on death row. Suge was also subletting a Malibu property of Longo's. Longo would receive a letter of dismissal from the DA's office after the findings had been made public. Death Row's investigation had expanded into zoning violations in May of 1996, being in relation to crimes of violence. The FBI files report that this investigation discovered LAPD armed security guards in plain clothes and in security uniforms were found to have been working off-duty for death row. The files further reveal on June 1st of 1996, the ATF had informed the LAPD about their multi-agency task force investigation into death row. The files reveal how the LAPD had reported to the ATF the following day how the heads of the LAPD had a meeting with death row representatives where the LAPD had expressed dissatisfaction towards death row for using off-duty officers. Suge Knight had been connected to police security through Reggie Wright Jr. Suge Knight had gotten information from Reggie Wright Sr. between 93 and 94 that the Compton Mob Piru members who had been providing his security had put together a plan to hold him for ransom. Reggie Wright Jr., being a former Compton cop, had then been introduced to the company to provide police security. Suge loaned Reggie $300,000 to start Right Way's Protective Services, which had employed over 25 police officers to provide security for death row. The label also had a connection into the Rampart division through Sharifa Knight. Sharifa Knight had been Suge Knight's wife until 1996. She had been given nightlife management by Suge Knight, which had been a management company for death row artists. She would receive agents' commission from the artists, such as Snoop Dogg generating $1.6 million for her commission pay under the management company. The FBI files claim Sharifa Knight began to have an affair with LAPD Rampart cop Kevin Gaines as early as 1993. LAPD officer Kevin Lowe had told Detective Greg Grant that Kevin Gaines had attempted to recruit him to work security for the girlfriend of Suge Knight. Former Rampart Captain Rich Meres claimed in the podcast Game of Crimes that Kevin Gaines was found to have had 7 different credit cards registered to death row.
When they did the investigation, he had 7 major credit cards from Death Row Records in his wallet.
He also confirmed that Kevin Gaines was found to have been recruiting officers from various different departments in order to work off-duty security for death row.
Kevin Gaines, on the other hand, was very intimately involved with Death Row Records. He was involved in actually hiring off-duty cops to work for Death Row Records, not only from LAPD, but Inglewood PD, Compton PD, Sheriff's department.
After a TV series reported to have discovered a check from Death Row Records to Kevin Gaines in his gym bag, Reggie Wright Jr. in recorded audio had asked Sharifah Knight if she had ever wrote any checks from Death Row Records to Kevin Gaines. She claimed not to and further stated he would hire his fellow cops to provide security for Snoop Dogg, who paid them in cash. She had further alleged if Gaines had ever carried out an electronic transfer, he would use protocols to avoid filing currency transaction reports. This is a form of money laundering where transactions are carried out in amounts of less than $10,000, as currency transaction reports are not filled out, which makes the transaction untraceable to the IRS. Suge Knight was said to have put hands on Kevin Gaines in the back of a car after finding out about the affair in 1996, to which he had come to learn Gaines was a cop after Sharifah had told him. A rumor had circulated that during the filming for the music video of California Love, Suge had Kevin Gaines drove out to the desert and stripped down to humiliate him due to the affair. The FBI files linked Kevin Gaines to missing evidence in a Snoop Dogg murder trial, which had resulted in Snoop's acquittal. Shell casings and clothing from the scene had been booked into the Pacific Division's evidence locker. The evidence against Snoop had gone missing, with it being Kevin Gaines who had dominion over the locker, as it had been a division he worked at during the time. Snoop Dogg's acquittal party had been thrown at Monty's Steakhouse. Kevin Gaines was found to have had receipts of almost $1,000 at the same restaurant. David Kenner, Death Row's lawyer, had been representing Snoop Dogg in the trial and also had a connection into the Rampart division. David Kenner shared the same attorney as Rampart officer David Mack. Donald Emery, their attorney, had been representing them at the same time, as David Mack had been implicated in a '97 bank robbery and had also been accused of being involved in the killing of rap star Biggie Smalls, while David Kenner was being represented by Donald Ray due to the federal investigation into tax violations and the investigation into prosecutor Larry Longo, which David Kenner had refused to appear in court for. During David Mack's deposition, he had been questioned on if his attorney had been funneling money from David Kenner through Death Row Records to help pay Mack's legal fees. David Mack's former police partner had been Rafael Perez. Rafael Perez had been the cop who had exposed the Rampart corruption scandal. Perez revealed this after being caught stealing narcotics out the evidence locker. The scandal implicated over 70 officers in misconduct. Officers such as Mack and Perez were reported as being members of the Piru Street Gang. They had been pictured in a photo with the Chief of Police Bernard Park's daughter dressed in all red with a cake which read "Blood's Rule." Bernard Parks, in an interview with documentary filmmaker Nick Broomfield, had claimed David Mack and Rafael Perez had worked off-duty security for Death Row.
We know that David Mack and Rafael Perez both work security in this rap culture as it relates to some of these artists, but we have had
the Death
Row Records.
LAPD Senior Lead Detective Kenneth Knox, who had been continuously responding to reports from Can-Am Studio in Tarzana, which was used by Death Row, claimed to have found Mack and Perez working security there in plain clothes. Artist C-Style, along with Snoop Dogg's cousin Joe Cool, had both claimed to have seen Mack and Perez around Death Row numerous times.
I've seen David Mack plenty of times.
Who was the other one? Rafael Perez.
Rafael Perez, seen him too.
Officer Perez, he was friends with Suge. I've seen him up there several times, and he was friends with Suge. I seen him in uniform and out of uniform.
Suge Knight was also being investigated due to his ties into the Piru street gangs of Los Angeles. Suge Knight had grown up in the Compton Mob Piru neighborhood.
Suge Knight had reinvented himself as a Mob Piru gang member, dressing in the blood colors, surrounding himself with a posse of ex-con Piru gang members.
He had gone to college where he played for the Rams in the NFL. Therefore, he was not an active gang member. Suge Knight had been reported as becoming a Compton Mob Piru member for association, as he had hired the Compton Mob Piru to provide his security in the early 90s.
Record promoter Doug Young helped Suge Knight start Death Row Records, and then quit when he felt he had to carry a gun to be safe from all the street gang members Knight brought into the company. Knight, who pointedly dresses in all red, the colors of the Blood street gang.
Compton Mob Piru Mob James admitted he had been behind the plot on Suge Knight to hold him for ransom, which resulted in Mob James being replaced as the head of security for Reggie Wright Jr. Suge was associated to several Piru street gangs such as the Campanella Park Piru through his enforcer Jake Robles, as well as the Treetop Piru through DJ Quick. Suge Knight began to appear on magazines in gang colours, with Harry O revealing in the Welcome to Death Row documentary that he had warned Suge Knight about associating with gangs.
Suge started to participate in the gang activity. I was very adamant with him about that, and I told him that would be his demise.
The FBI files claim the Pyrus associated to death row had been dealing on the street in a large-scale operation linked to the East Coast. L.A. Arwine, a former Long Beach police officer, had been used by the task force to go undercover and collect as much information as possible on the gang connection. The officer reported back in claiming that the company was alleged to have been heavily involved with assisting the gangs in arms and narcotics trafficking. The officer had told the FBI that Suge Knight had been making exorbitant amounts of money from kickbacks through the Pyrus criminality, which had included robbing Hispanic suppliers. The task agent believed that the Pyrus had been using the death row offices in Wilshire as a warehouse for the large-scale operation, which he claimed had been transporting to the East Coast. The Wilshire offices had been caught on tape being raided by the sheriff's office due to the gang connections. The task agent reported the Pyrus were alleged to have had two methods in the operation, with one being robbing Hispanic suppliers for resale where they would make $26,000 per brick when sold to the East Coast, or instead purchase for $14,500 per brick and then make a profit of $7,500 when sold to the East Coast. The task force were alleged to have allowed Kevin Hackey to be complicit in a trafficking operation by assisting the Pyrus to further collect information about the crimes. An informant from the Lancaster State Prison had told the task force that he had identified Kevin Hackey and other LAPD officers as assisting the Pyrus in the alleged operation by giving police escorts, providing security during transactions, and intercepting police radios for safer drop-offs. The task force seemed to have been complicit in both the alleged arms and narcotics trafficking operations in order to continue with information gathering and under a sting operation such as gun walking. LAPD Detective Russell Paul, in an interview with Nick Broomfield, had also alleged police officers were assisting death row in the operation.
Law enforcement officers were working for gangsters, known felons, basically organized crime. Because it was no secret that Death Row Records was involved in drug trafficking.
Mob James confirmed in BET's Death Row Chronicles that Suge Knight had been involved in arms and narcotics trafficking.
Suge was involved in guns. Suge was involved in drugs. Suge was involved in, he was a half-ass pimp.
Mob James was also later found out to have been an FBI informant. FBI agent Phil Carson revealed there were 5 FBI informants in Suge's circle. Snoop Dogg's cousin Joe Cool, in a 2021 documentary Last Man Standing, claimed to have seen a narcotics operation being ran out of Death Row's offices.
It was drugs up there. It was, drug dealings. It was like multiple suitcases with powdered or Reebok up in there. It was a lot I've seen. And I've been handed things,
The FBI had a simultaneous operation on Bad Boy, which was investigating them for gun violations and possible homicides. The FBI files reveal NYPD Major Case Squad detectives and agents from the Department of the Treasury had Bad Boy under surveillance for the investigation. Bad Boy had been launched by Puff Daddy in 1993. Puffy's former bodyguard Gene Dill claimed that Puffy was alleged to have become a federal informant as early as '92. Gene claimed to have known that Puffy would report to a specific agent in Washington, D.C. Bad Boy was rumored to have gotten his financial start from a hustler called Corey Jacob. Corey Jacob was an associate of the Bronx Valley Mob, which had been a gang who Puffy's bodyguard Anthony Wolf Jones had belonged to. Puffy had signed rapper Christopher Wallace to Bad Boy in 1993 under the stage name of Biggie Smalls. A teenage rapper had been using the name of Biggie Smalls prior to the signing, who had then filed a copyright lawsuit against Bad Boy.
I got some papers in the mail. The original Biggie Smalls said he gonna sue me for everything I got if I use his name again.
Word.
He gotta get some kind of money, so please, nobody, if you see me, my name is the Notorious B.I.G. You can call me Big, Notorious Big, whatever, no more Biggie Smalls.
Inmate Dexter Isaac had reported more information about the lawsuit in his book From Friends to Enemies. He claimed to have approached Anthony Wolf Jones in a tunnel nightclub in New York to ask him with providing assistance to rob Puffy. Isaac claimed he was then told by Wolf not to follow through with it due to Wolf's investments in Bad Boy. Isaac claimed to have found out that Wolf was alleged to have gotten money from Corey Jacob through the Bronx Valley Mob gang in order to pay off the copyright lawsuit against Bad Boy. Wolf and his associates, according to Isaac, had then become minority owners of the label. Puffy was then alleged to have been being extorted by Corey Jacob and the Bronx Valley Mob gang. Isaac had stated that Wolf was then alleged to have gone into business with Jimmy Henchman concerning the artists of Bad Boy. HITMAN was a record executive and now convicted criminal for numerous charges such as drug trafficking and murder. HITMAN's attorney released paperwork which claimed HITMAN acted as a federal informant in the 90s, helping with solving historical crimes. Isaac claimed HITMAN had been in a deal with Wolf, where HITMAN would act as a recruiter of artists for Bad Boy. Isaac claimed to have found out that HITMAN would be promised a finder's fee from Wolf through Bad Boy and also get management commission for each artist he would introduce. Tupac had been signed to Interscope during this time and had been in New York filming for the movie Above the Rim. Tupac had been friendly with Biggie and Puffy during this time. Tupac's brother Mo Preem in an Art of Dialogue interview claimed Tupac had been ready to sign with Bad Boy at the time until he had found out information about the label which made him back out of the deal. Tupac in an interview with Sway had claimed to have found out that the dealers on the East Coast had them under extortion.
The East Coast drug dealers got them under extortion. I came and fucked up everything.
Tupac had been introduced to New York stick-up kid Haitian Jack while he was filming on the set of Above the Rim. Biggie had warned Tupac about hanging out with Haitian Jack. Tupac's cousin William Lassane on the Cytonia live show claimed to have seen paperwork on Haitian Jack, which he alleged had outlined him as a federal informant.
Jack was an informant. We saw in his paperwork that he was a known informant. No bullshit. I saw it with my own eyes.
Haitian Jack's former roommate Tory Spado had also alleged that Jack was a federal informant. Tupac had caught a case through Haitian Jack after Jack had introduced him to a girl in a nightclub in 1993, who had then pressed charges on Tupac within a week of meeting. Author John Potash goes as far as looking into possible COINTELPRO tactics used by the feds against Tupac due to Tupac's Black Panther heritage. COINTELPRO was a program used by the FBI to bring down the Black Panthers. One of the tactics involved creating an East Coast-West Coast war within the Panthers on both coasts, where the feds had sent fake letters to each side dissing each other. Darford Perry, an undercover agent who had worked under COINTELPRO, had revealed one of the alleged tactics had been the agency funding informants to set up influential people in nightclubs with females. Haitian Jack's attorney Paul Brenner had worked for the Policemen's Benevolent Association and had Haitian Jack's trial severed from Tupac's. The police had destroyed evidence in the form of voicemails where the accuser had been on tape speaking of Tupac's innocence. Tupac's attorney Michael Warren had found out that Haitian Jack had a mile-long rap sheet of cases which would all have been dismissed, with him saying it was indicative of a police intelligence asset. Tupac had done an interview live on the news outside the courthouse on the 29th of November 1994, where he had raised allegations of Haitian Jack being a snitch.
Pac was being interviewed. He said something about Haitian Jack. Like he used to be my homeboy. I guess he's some snitch. I'm charged with being in concert with them guys. Where they at?
Henchmen had hired Dexter Isaac and an associate called JD to rob Tupac at Quad Recording Studio the following day. Puffy and Biggie had been at the studio at the time. Both Dexter Isaac and Puffy's former bodyguard Gene Dill claimed that Puffy knew Tupac was going to be dealt with. The robbers shot Tupac 5 times after he had retaliated to the robbery attempt. Dexter Isaac claimed the robbery was carried out in an attempt to get Tupac into a protection racket by henchmen and then signed to Bad Boy to claim the rewards from Wolf. Haitian Jack in the 2017 Fox documentary Who Shot Biggie and Tupac claimed it was carried out due to what Tupac had said about him.
You know, there are lots of people who think you're the person who called for the hit on Tupac at Quad Studios.
I got the call within 30 seconds after it happened. He said, listen, man, I got it, homie, and it went all bad. The person at the time, we were real cool, and he felt like Tupac had no right to say what he said about me, especially in New York City.
The police who arrested Tupac in the Haitian Jack case had been the same responding officers to the robbery. Tupac was pictured in a wheelchair in court the following day, where he had received up to 4 years from the case with Haitian Jack. Haitian Jack in a separate trial had received a fine and probation. The incident was the beginning of what was termed as the East Coast-West Coast rap war, which paralleled the operation against the Black Panthers by the feds. Puffy, Haitian Jack and henchmen had all been rumoured as being federal informants, who were alleged to have been involved in the incident which had sparked the war. Suge Knight and Puffy were friends until 1995. Suge Knight began to visit Tupac in prison and knew as early as August of 1995 in a joint effort with Interscope and Capitol Records, Tupac would be freed from prison in 2 months and begin to make music with Death Row. Tupac while in prison had heard Who Shot Ya by Biggie, which had been strategically released by Puffy to look like a Tupac diss. While in prison, Tupac began to get anonymous letters and inmates began to tell him it had been Biggie who had set him up. The 2002 Biggie and Tupac documentary commented on how the inmates may have been informants acting on instructions.
Another theory about the Tupac-Biggie war is that the strangers Tupac referred to in jail, telling him Biggie's homeboys had shot him, were in fact working for the FBI, who had a policy to cause dissension within the hip-hop movement.
Tupac relayed the information about Biggie and Puffy to Suge Knight during the visits. Suge Knight, while at the August 95 Source Awards being held at Madison Square Garden in New York, had, while accepting an award, given a shout-out to Tupac, where he then went on to diss Puffy, who had been in the audience. Dexter Isaac claimed that Wolf, who had been with Puffy at the Source Awards, had then through Jimmy Henchman had gotten a Harlem hustler called Eric Zip Martin to hook up Puffy with protection by the Crips when he would be in California. Eric Zip Martin was in underworld business with the Santana Block Compton Crips, who had then introduced him to Dwayne Davis of the Southside Compton Crips. Davis claimed to have first met Puffy through Zip in 1992, but didn't begin with providing enforcement until 1995. Puffy and Suge Knight had attended Jermaine Dupri's birthday party in September of 1995 in Atlanta. Atlanta Deputy C.J. Howard, who was providing off-duty security at the event, had claimed to have identified Southside Compton Crips Orlando Anderson and Corey Edwards as being with Puffy at the event. It's unsure the reliability of the witness statement, as the report which claimed he had identified Orlando Anderson in a powder blue jacket also outlines that he had placed numerous different people from a photo lineup as the same person in the powder blue jacket. Suge Knight's enforcer at Campanella Park Piru called Jake Robles had gotten into an argument with a New Yorker called Jason Brown at the event, who had been an associate of Puffy and Anthony Wolf Jones. Jake Robles had been shot and killed while leaving the venue, which the media had blamed on Wolf. Tupac was freed from prison a month after the incident, where he began making music with Death Row on the West Coast. With the Coastal War now going full steam ahead, Tupac, a day after getting out of prison, had met Biggie's wife Faith Evans in Los Angeles, where they had made a song together for his then upcoming album All Eyes on Me. Tupac claimed to have gotten with Faith on a night, which had been backed up by several witnesses. Bad Boy and Death Row had numerous run-ins with each other, which had also included the Southside Compton Crips, such as an incident at the 1996 Soul Train Awards. The Southside Compton Crips and the Compton Mob Pyrus, who were natural enemies, had now been placed against each other due to the beef.
I called one night and asked to see was cool to come out of LA because he was scared of Suge. And I guess he was trying to be slick because we were Crips and his enemies are Bloods, you know what I'm saying?
Suge Knight got MOB members Trayvon Lane and Buntree to put Tupac on as MOB, with Tupac getting a tattoo of its initials to make it official. Artist C-Style, in a 2021 documentary Last Man Standing, had remembered the night he had witnessed Tupac be put onto the MOB.
Tupac over there in all red. We went over there and looked. I said, well, they got him. And we went on back over there to our side. That night we went over and looked and went in there and seen him in all that red. That night he turned MOB.
A Compton police report had spread rumors that Puffy had put a bounty out to the Crips on death row chains. The police report was based on information from informants, which was purely a rumor, but it created an opportunity for the Crips to hunt down death row Pyrus to claim the bounty. Southside Compton Crip Orlando Anderson, who had been the nephew of Dwayne Davis, had attempted to steal the death row chain from Trayvon Lane in a Foot Locker store within the Lakewood Mall in July of 1996. Orlando Anderson would then have a run-in with death row in Las Vegas in September of 1996. Tupac had to take on David Kenner as his attorney once he had gotten out of prison as part of the bail agreement. Yasmin Fuller, who was helping Tupac with the audit against death row filed in the last 2 weeks of August of 1996, had also made Tupac aware of the conflict of interest of having David Kenner as both his defense attorney and entertainment attorney. Tupac had then fired David Kenner and Reggie Wright Jr. during the same time at the end of August.
A week before Tupac's death, he fired David Kenner, and people said publicly that's going to get him killed.
Tupac during this time had a case come up against him which had revoked his appeal under the Three Strikes law in California. David Kenner then had the case moved to Las Vegas to circumvent the law. Kenner had ran terms by a judge where conditions would have to be created which would be suitable for Tupac to serve community service at, for this to be the penalty to avoid jail time. Tupac was set to travel to Atlanta to confront his cousin about selling his possessions, but had to travel to Vegas instead to avoid jail time. due to the circumstances created by Kenner. David Kenner had then worked with a Las Vegas attorney called George Kalisis. Kalisis was an attorney who represented Vegas cops in corruption cases. The Compton police corruption scandal, as looked into earlier, alleged there had been an operation transporting to Vegas from the missing evidence out the locker. George Kalisis was also the business attorney for Club 662. Suge Knight attempted to throw events there 3 prior times, but the feds had been interfering with permits. George Kalisis set up a fundraiser at the club for a Las Vegas Metro cop called Patrick Barry in order to raise funds for his organization called Barry's Boxing. Under a charity event, it was deemed acceptable to act as a review night for Suge Knight's permits and as a place where Tupac could perform at in benefit of the Las Vegas Metro cop in order for him to serve community service. Tupac during this time had fulfilled the 3-album deal with his amended contract with Interscope under Death Row. He had displayed a new contract with Quincy Jones's Quest Records to his group The Outlaws, with former member Young Noble revealing in the 2017 series Who Killed Tupac that the contract had been a joint venture to begin Machiavelli Records.
Right before he passed away, I seen the first draft of the contract. He's gonna do it through Machiavelli Records / Quest Records, Quincy Jones label at the time.
On the day of the Vegas trip, a dozen right-way security guards had been called to a meeting at an attorney's office which was said to have been George Kalisis. At the meeting had been Reggie Wright Jr., David Kenner and George Kalisis. The guards had been told to disarm their weapons due to permit restrictions in Vegas. The guards confirmed they had been assigned to Las Vegas on 5 prior occasions, without ever being told to disarm. Reggie Wright Jr. claimed they had been told to only disarm at Club 662. However, Michael Moore had refused to give up his weapon and was therefore removed from Tupac and reassigned to Club 662. Frank Alexander had also been informed that he would not have access to a security radio. Kevin Hackey was in possession of Frank Alexander's radio, but Hackey had been assigned by his job to stay at the Compton School District Police Department on the day. Hackey had also been responsible for providing bulletproof vests, which therefore had been removed due to his reassignment to the Compton station. Hackey confirmed there were 2 FBI agents and 1 ATF agent which were following and recording Death Row in Vegas. Tupac had been left with 1 unarmed bodyguard without communication. Tupac, accompanied by Frank Alexander, had been captured in footage walking throughout the MGM Grand. Frank Alexander briefly lost Tupac during this time, as he had been forced to use a payphone to contact the security detail, being due to his radio being removed. Frank had caught up with Tupac and they had waited for Suge Knight to attend a boxing match. Mike Tyson had been scheduled in a match with Bruce Seldon. It was under this event that the fundraiser for the Vegas Metro Cops boxing organization had been set up at Club 662, which were then the circumstances which served as community service for Tupac. Suge Knight had been accompanied to Las Vegas by Compton Mob Piru members. The right-way bodyguards would refer to them as Homeboy Security. Reggie Wright Jr. in a now-removed Art of Dialogue interview had claimed there were several frequencies on the security radio, with one being occupied by Homeboy Security. The security radios were said to have 3 frequencies on it, with one being of Homeboy Security between Suge Knight and the Compton MOB Pyrus, and then another being between right-way security guards, and a third being between staff members of Death Row. The FBI would be privy of the frequency through Kevin Hackey. Suge Knight was in possession of a radio on the night, which he had had with him in his BMW, which can be seen in crime scene photos. Those with Suge Knight acting as Homeboy Security in Las Vegas had been Compton Mob Piru members Alton Buntry McDonald, Trayvon Lane and K-Dub. Buntry can be seen with one of the security radios in the MGM Grand. After leaving the fight, Mob Piru Trayvon Lane had spotted Southside Compton Crip Orlando Anderson standing in the lobby of the MGM Grand. Trayvon Lane pointed him out to Tupac and Suge Knight, telling him he was the Crip who messes with Puffy who tried to steal his chain. Orlando Anderson was seen on CCTV getting jumped by Tupac, Suge Knight and the MOB Pyrus. After fleeing from the scene, they changed their clothes, then began to drive to Club 662 so Tupac could perform at the benefit. While in a BMW stopped at an intersection on the Vegas Strip, they had been shot at from a passing Cadillac 13 times. Kevin Hackey claimed agents had been in a car behind Frank Alexander's, which had been directly behind the BMW. Hackey claimed paperwork revealed that agents captured the incident on tape, which now remains in the FBI's archives containing the suspect's identity. Southside Compton Crip Dwayne Davis in 2008 had been set up in a sting operation by a different government task force. The task force had been set up to reinvestigate the Biggie Smalls case after it had been pinned on former LAPD officers. The task force had been headed by LAPD cops Greg Kading and Darren Dupree, as well as Compton cop Tim Brennan. They were given a task force called Wrap It Up by the government, being in response to a lawsuit Biggie's family had filed against the LAPD for $500 million, being due to allegations of the LAPD being behind Biggie's death. Dwayne Davis was seen as a person of interest in the case, being due to his prior connections into Bad Boy. Lil C's, who was an artist under Biggie's group Junior Mafia, had confirmed in a tape police interview in a 2015 documentary Murder Rap, which had been about the task force, that he had seen Dwayne Davis around Bad Boy at a Jodeci concert.
Well, I saw one of them on that picture you gave.
Well, let's get that picture back out then.
You saw one of them guys here?
Yeah.
In the picture? Mm-hmm. Right there. Okay, you saw that guy at number 2 there, huh? Yep. So you saw that guy when you was on the Joseph tour? Same guy? Same guy.
Puffy's former bodyguard Gene Dill had also confirmed in a police interview released in the documentary that around 35 to 50 Crips had rolled with them to an event.
It had to be anywhere from 35 to 57 Crips that rolled with them.
And these are all the guys from Compton? Same group of people?
The task force had set up Dwayne Davis in a sting operation where they held a 25-year prison sentence over his head, or to take a proffer agreement and be given partial immunity to discuss the case of Biggie Smalls. He had no information to give them around the Biggie case, but claimed he could tell them about the Tupac case. Davis had previously have been questioned by the FBI in 1998 regarding the Tupac case, where he told them himself and the Crips had nothing to do with it. Greg Kading can be heard on tape telling Davis that this time the questioning cannot go down the same route as the FBI's, otherwise his freedom would be in jeopardy.
We do have to emphasize to you, everything in this report cannot be like that report.
Davis is now claiming in court that under this duress, he had told a fabricated story to Kading and a task force to avoid the 25-year prison sentence. He had told them he had been in Las Vegas during a time with his nephew and other Southside Compton Crips. Dwayne Davis, in his book Compton Street Legend, had said the Southside Compton Crips had met a rolling 60s Crip in a car wash who was a ticket scalper. Davis claimed the Southsiders had also have been told by the Crip that the Compton mob Pyrus were going to be in Las Vegas, telling him Suge Knight had purchased a large amount of tickets. Orlando Anderson was found not to have had tickets for the fight. Al Giddens, who had been made the head of security specifically for Club 662, had Compton mob Pyru Mob James work on the door of the venue on the night of the fundraiser. Mob James claimed to have attended a meeting prior to the trip, where the homeboy security were told in precaution that the Southside Compton Crips were going to be in Las Vegas. Dwayne Davis had told the task force that after the Orlando Anderson incident, a 118 East Coast Block Crip had met him at the Rainforest Cafe in the MGM Grand, where he told him Orlando Anderson had been jumped by Death Row. Davis went on to tell the task force he had met up with Eric Zip Martin in the parking lot of the MGM Grand, who had been with Foxy Brown. Davis went on to tell them that Zip had given him a Glock from a hidden compartment within his car. Dwayne Davis has been caught lying about this in numerous ways. The first is in a Vlad TV interview where Vlad mentions his remarks of not having any weapons in Vegas, to which Davis responds with, "Who said that?" Vlad then reminds him that he had said in his book that he had gotten a Glock from Zip, to which Davis looks off camera and says he doesn't want to speak about it.
But you guys don't have any guns.
Who said that?
Well, it was in the book until Von Zip came in the picture. And I guess Foxy Brown was with Zip.
All right, let's, I don't want to talk about that.
Foxy Brown also wasn't in Las Vegas, as she had been performing in support of Nas and AZ on a Keith Sweat tour, which was taking place at the Palace of Auburn Hills in Michigan. During an Art of Dialogue interview, he'd once again changed his story, as he had claimed Las Vegas associates he had been doing underworld business with had taken him to a hotel and laid out numerous weapons for the Crips to use in retaliation. Davis, in his recorded tape by the task force, claimed after getting a Glock from Zip, himself and the Crips travelled in 2 different vehicles to Club 662 in order to try and find Tupac and Suge Knight. Davis had told the task force that he'd rode in a van, while a Cadillac had followed containing Southside Compton Compton Crips Terrence Brown, Orlando Anderson, and DeAndre Smith. He told the task force that the white Cadillac had been rented under Terrence Brown's mother-in-law's name. Davis in his book had furthered the claims about the convoy by claiming Big Meech from BMF was in the van with them riding to Club 662. When questioned about this on The Art of Dialogue, he had once again changed his story, saying it was just an associate of BMF. Mob James, who was working on the door of 662, claimed to have seen the Crips pull up outside. Mob James then retracted his claims, saying he didn't actually see them. Davis told the task force when leaving Club 662 he had then gotten in the Cadillac, where they had gone on to see Tupac hanging out of the sunroof of the BMW. Davis told the task force he had then given the Glock from Zip to Orlando Anderson, who had carried out the drive-by.
He just pulled up on the side. Lane's like, dude, pop. He leaned over on the window, he rolled down the window, pop.
He had claimed to the task force it was carried out with the intention of claiming $1 million bounty put forward by Puffy in the summer of '96. People believe Kading, when questioning this, can be heard as leading Davis into forming an amount, as he puts forward several options for him to choose from.
How's the conversation go? I mean, okay, listen, I'll do it, but I need $500,000. You tell him we'll do it for $1 million, and he's like, okay, I'll do it for $1 million. He agrees, you shake on it or something like that.
Davis contradicts himself in the confession, as he first says we wanted $1 million, claiming it was the Crips' idea, only to immediately after say Puffy created the amount.
We need really specific details regarding that.
Yeah, we wanted $1 million.
Who brought up the amount of $1 million?
He did.
Puffy did?
Yeah.
Okay. Wasn't you?
No, it wasn't me. We wanted $1 million.
Davis would go on to claim in an Art of Dialogue interview that the $1 million bounty was a lie created by Kading, to which he had then gone along with.
Puffy, he approached you about pitting the hit on Tupac and Suge?
No. He never approached me about that. That's Greg Kading. All that show was a bunch of
Davis was once again caught in another lie, as he had claimed to met up with Tupac and Suge Knight the night before in Vegas, but it's a proven fact Tupac and Suge Knight didn't go there till the following day. Greg Kading had secretly recorded Dwayne Davis's proffer session, which had then been published in the 2015 documentary Murder Rap. Filmmaker RJ Bond had reported on Sam Tripoli's podcast that Darren Dupree, who had been the LAPD cop that had worked on a task force in setting up Davis, had helped Davis secure a $150,000 deal from the BET network in order to repeat his claims in the TV series Death Row Chronicles.
You said the shots came from the back. Big Dre, Orlando. Who shot Tupac?
to keep it for the code of the streets. It just came from the backseat, bro.
In accepting the deal, Davis had violated his proffer agreement, which was given to him by the same cop which had gotten him the deal, which had resulted in Davis being charged with the murder of Tupac, which he is now pending trial for. He is now claiming in court that he had made up the claims under duress to escape the 25-year prison sentence, to which he had then followed up with repeating for monetary purposes. Only Orlando Anderson and DeAndre Smith have been proven to have been in Vegas on CCTV. Anderson had been sued by Tupac's estate, where he had carried out several interviews claiming to have been a scapegoat.
I've been thinking, maybe I'm a scapegoat or something. I just want to let everybody know, I didn't do it.
Orlando Anderson had been killed in a shootout in a car wash in Compton in May of 1998, with the first person on the scene being Reggie Wright Sr. The FBI files claim the Southside Compton Crips were set up to look as if they carried out the murder, to cover up for alleged police involvement. Author Randall Sullivan on the TV show The Conspiracy Zone in 2002 claimed documentation had shown Orlando Anderson had financial dealings with Death Row prior to the Vegas trip.
There's a lot of evidence that Suge Knight and Orlando Anderson had dealings that preceded Tupac Shakur's murder.
Author Michael Douglas Carlin revealed how during a time of raids in Compton following Tupac's death, Reggie Wright Jr. was found to have been in Dwayne Davis's payo book, revealing there had been financial dealings between them prior to the incident.
When we talk about Reggie Wright Jr., his phone number was in Keefe D's payo book, meaning Keefe D had some kind of business relationship with Reggie Wright Jr. And that shows us there's a contact there that goes way back into the 90s.
Michael Douglas Carlin also claimed in the 2017 series Who Killed Tupac that Death Row's accounts revealed Orlando Anderson had been listed in the Paid To section.
If you look in the Death Row Records accounts payable files, there's a file marked OA.
Orlando Anderson was paid to take part in a staged fight
at the MGM Grand and that someone else was the shooter.
Suge Knight in 3 different prison interviews claimed Orlando Anderson had not been the shooter and stated the Southside Compton Crip theory was a false narrative. He claims instead corrupt cops were behind the murder of Tupac. In a 2018 prison interview with Michael Douglas Carlin, Suge said Orlando Anderson had not been the shooter and had named Rampart cop Rafael Perez and his crew, saying they were trying to kill him too.
And the sad thing about it, Orlando wasn't even the shooter, you know? It's said that, but that's not at all. Perez and them was all involved. They were trying to kill me too.
He further stated that the cops were alleged to have been connected to Reggie Wright Jr. and his ex-wife, Sharifa.
Perez and them was all involved. They were trying to kill me too, but see, because Perez and Reg was good friends, and Perez and Sharita and Reg is great friends, and so all those 3 together was trying to plot.
In a 2023 TMZ interview regarding the arrest of Dwayne Davis, Suge Knight claimed the Crip narrative was false and it had not been Orlando Anderson and Dwayne Davis.
Orlando was the shooter and Keefe was in on it. Is that correct?
No.
Then who shot Tupac?
It wasn't Anderson, so that's all I got to say about that part.
You are saying Orlando was not the shooter. Do I have that right?
1,000%.
Suge in a 2025 interview with Piers Morgan claimed it had been crooked cops who had killed Tupac.
Those same crooked cops, they cost Tupac Shakur and Biggie Smalls their life. It was a murder for hire hit. It was blocked in. It was more than one shooter. Crooked cops destroyed hip-hop.
Suge had been first questioned about the cops in a 2017 Fox documentary. Suge said he didn't know the cops and claimed it was Reggie Wright Jr. who knew them.
Tell me about David Mack.
I never had a conversation with none of those dudes.
Suge, those names be popping on the streets. You know about Rafael Perez, Mack, and them doing the whole setup thing.
They knew Reggie Wright. They didn't know me.
With Suge Knight saying it had been Rafael Perez and his crew, a theory can be created based on information surrounding the case. Shows such as Case Closed and Who Killed Tupac look into the idea that the connection into police departments through Reggie Wright Jr. had been utilized to take over death row.
The death row takeover theory, an inside job for people trying to take control of death row. Attorney David Kenner, Reggie Wright Jr., and his wife, Sharita Knight.
Rafael Perez, when uncovering the Rampart scandal, was reported as belonging to a clique of 5 officers. The officers were reported as being Rafael Perez, David Mack, Nino Durden, Kevin Gaines, and Sammy Martin. The officers were all part of the Rampart division and were implicated in the corruption scandal. Nino Durden had replaced David Mack as Rafael Perez's police partner. The FBI documents reveal that Kevin Gaines had been assigned to a special assignment by the LAPD during the time of the Tupac incident, where he was confirmed by witnesses as being in Las Vegas with other officers when the shooting had taken place. Sharifa Knight was questioned on the claims against her in the Who Killed Tupac show.
Dirty cops who were de facto running death row. It was an assassination attempt on Suge in Las Vegas, who would have everything to gain.
Sharif, all the artists at death row was willing to come with me. So if I wanted to take death row from Suge, I could have took death row if I wanted death row.
Reggie Wright Jr. in a live stream with the YouTube channel Bomb First when replying to court documents by Dwayne Davis's defense accusing him of orchestrating the Tupac murder, for some reason mentioned David Mack when speaking of witnesses present at the Tupac shooting. At 20 minutes 16 seconds into the live stream, when talking about witnesses on the scene of the crime, he is quoted as saying, "I can't think of no other right-way security guards that was on the scene. David Mack and them didn't work for me." People in the comments pointed it out as a bizarre statement to make when mentioning people who were on the crime scene to add David Mack's name. Idi Amin, a member of Tupac's rap group The Outlaws who was in the car behind the BMW, claimed in a 2017 series Who Killed Tupac that one of the people who had been firing had been wearing gloves.
White Cadillac came up, slowed down, began shooting. The hand was a black hand, a white hand.
The arm was, the hand had a glove on.
The hand of the glove, was it a black glove?
Yeah.
Yaki Gaddafi, who was also in the car behind the BMW, claimed in a police witness statement he couldn't tell if the shots were coming out the front or back windows. Napoleon from The Outlaws revealed Yaki Gaddafi had told them it had not been Orlando Anderson.
Gaddafi seen the guy, you know what I mean? The guy looked at Gaddafi, Gaddafi looked back at him, he saw the arm come out the window. I don't think it was Baby Lane, the one who Gaddafi seen.
Shaylane Turner, a witness on the scene who had been in a convertible, had identified a left-handed shooter. shooter. An LAPD investigation into Kevin Gaines revealed he was left-handed. Nino Durden was also reported as being left-handed in LAPD transcripts. David Mack was also reported as being left-handed by Department of Justice reports. Hospital records reveal Orlando Anderson had been treated for a dislocated shoulder at the Sunrise Medical Center in Vegas, being due to the injuries sustained in the MGM Grand. Not only do people argue that this would remove him from being able to sustain the kickback if carrying out the shooting, but results also show Orlando Anderson had not been left-handed. It could be argued if he was the shooter, he used a different hand due to the injuries. Russell Paul claimed Las Vegas police had made him aware that Orlando Anderson had been on surveillance footage at the MGM Grand lobby bar during the time of the shooting. Yaki Gaddafi described in police reports the shooter being dark-skinned. He described the driver as a light-skinned person with a mustache. Gaddafi, before being killed within 2 months of the incident, would go on to tell OFTB member Ronald Watkins, the shooter resembled the light-skinned member of OFTB in hair and facial hair but had a darker complexion. When comparing the description to Perez's crew, which officer do you think matches the description the most? New information surrounding the cop theory claim an ex-security guard was said to have had knowledge that the cops had planned a hit at Monty Steakhouse. Suge Knight in his Piers Morgan interview had spoke on bodyguard Michael Moore hearing the words "got 'em" come over a security radio, being while he was with Reggie Wright Jr. and George Kalisis during the time of the shooting.
Reggie Wright Jr. and Michael Moore in the car. They get on the radio and they say, "Hey, got him."
Michael Moore further claimed he had then heard who he believed had been David Kenner come over the radio and say, "Don't say anything over the radio." Suge Knight in his Piers Morgan interview revealed how Kenner would say this frequently to them being one of his phrases, to which Suge Knight went on to question Kenner about the claims.
I know that attorney David Kenner always says, "Don't talk on your cell phone." I told David, I said, "Hey, was that you on the walkie-talkie? Because that's your line. Don't talk on the phone. Now you're the one saying don't talk on the walkie-talkie." He said, "That's not me talking on the walkie-talkie." So Kenner had sent some of my boxes and files to another attorney. When we discovered a walkie-talkie in the boxes, it blew me away.
Former Death Row artist Danny Boy revealed in an Art of Dialogue interview how Kenner once before while in New York had been using a radio to communicate with trained killers with snipers in buildings.
David Kenner, he pointed across the street, pointed in like about 3 different directions. And it was guys pointing from the roof like this. And they wasn't like the guys that the police that we had with us from LA. It wasn't Suge homies. It looked like some out of like an Italian movie.
David Kenner had also been connected to David Mack as he had shared the same attorney as him. Reggie Wright Jr. in an audio with Sharifa Knight claimed he had heard Kenner was comping Kevin Gaines for services. Filmmaker RJ Bond in Sam Tripoli's podcast claims he believes information points towards Kevin Gaines being the trigger man assisted by the Rampart cops.
I happen to think there's a different guy that was the shooter that was involved. I think I know who it was. The guy's name is Kevin Gaines. He was dating Suge Knight's estranged wife. If Suge Knight dies and the spouse can inherit Death Row Records, and she's buddy with the number 2 guy at Death Row Records who wants to take over the label, so they got their proxy, then you've got this guy, and again, Kevin Gaines was in Vegas. We can prove, unlike Keefe D, we can prove Kevin Gaines was in Vegas. There's all kinds of LAPD material that says he was in Vegas the night of the shooting.
Vegas police reports mention recovering a stolen white 4-door Cadillac a few blocks away from the scene, which the police suspected had been used in the crime. A theoretical diagram of arbitrary placement can be created under the cop theory. After Michael Moore had heard Gotham come over the radio, Reggie Wright Jr. and George Kalisis had then drove to the hospital, where Reggie Wright Jr. called his father Reggie Wright Sr., who was the head of Compton's gang division. The Tupac cover-up series on Tubi reports Reggie Wright Jr. as telling his father that there had been an incident with the Southside Compton Crips. The series reports Reggie Wright Sr. as then calling Compton cop Tim Brennan, who had been an officer of the gang unit. Compton cop Tim Brennan was then said to have been responsible for being the person to spread the Orlando Anderson theory throughout the authorities, being based off Reggie Wright Sr.'s information in the call. Reggie Wright Jr. had instructed bodyguard Frank Alexander to lie to the police and say Orlando Anderson had tried to take Tupac's chain in the MGM Grand. Reggie Wright Jr. had gone on to admit to this, claiming he'd done it in defense of Tupac, saying a citizen's arrest was trying to take place. Orlando Anderson, however, had not attempted with snatching Tupac's chain, which had been a lie which had been crafted then used throughout the Compton Police Department under the Orlando Anderson theory. Robert Ladd, who was Tim Brennan's police partner, had committed perjury in 2023 in the Dwayne Davis case by repeating a lie about the chain in court, to which he then retracted the statement. Tim Brennan had been on a 2008 government task force to counteract police involvement, which had been responsible for setting up Dwayne Davis. Events would occur in Compton following the incident, which Kevin Hackey had alleged was to promote the Crip theory.
Compton, California, a gang war and 5-day bloodbath apparently left 3 men dead and 10 wounded.
Following the Tupac incident, what was termed as the 10-day war had broken out in Compton. A series of gang shootings between the Bloods and Crips had occurred, which had claimed the lives of 3 people. Hackey claimed from what he had discovered during his undercover investigation, to his belief the gang war was instigated to serve as a cover-up under the Orlando Anderson theory, in order to reinforce the gang narrative and throw off the police involvement.
The Compton killings that occurred thereafter after Tupac was shot was just a diversion to make, general public, law enforcement believe it was a blood Crip thing. When indeed, it was all orchestrated.
The Labyrinth book by Randall Sullivan puts forward information which may link the ATF's alleged gun-walking operation throughout death row into the 10-day war. During the time of the 10-day war, this was when an informant had come forward in claiming they were alleged to have seen Suge Knight with a trunk full of AK-47s, allegedly handing them out to the Pyrus in Nickerson Gardens to be used in the war. The spark of the 10-day war had occurred from a crime committed with an AK-47. Southside Compton Crip Corey Edwards had also have been in Las Vegas during the time of the Tupac incident. His girlfriend had been a neighbor of 1513 South Mill Drive, which was a Southside Compton Crip territory, whose property had belonged to security guard Bobby Finch. Bobby Finch had been the brother of Compton cop Larry Finch. The Compton School District Police Department had been Larry Finch's department, which was the same as Kevin Hackey's. Bobby Finch was killed outside the property with an AK-47 a few days after the Tupac shooting. Compton police reported the unsolved case of Bobby Finch as mistaken identity for Corey Edwards, with them naming Compton mob Pyru Roger Neckbone Williams as a potential suspect. The Crips then retaliated, sparking a 10-day war, believing it had been the Pyrus. Michael Douglas Carlin alleged cops may have been behind the crime as part of the cover-up.
13 rounds were let off. 12 of those rounds hitting Bobby. The person who shot him was not scared that he was going to be caught. Maybe he was shot by a cop. And you have Reggie Wright Sr., who is the homicide investigator investigating this murder, and there's never a killer brought to justice.
It was at this same property where the Compton police claimed to have found a Glock the day after Orlando Anderson had been killed, which the task force with Tim Brennan in 2008 had then tried to pin against Dwayne Davis, claiming it was used by Orlando Anderson in the Tupac incident. As we know, Vegas PD had cleared the gun, finding it was not a match, after testing it against shell casings found at the scene.
I come across a 40 Glock on May 30th, 1998 at the house of this gang member's girlfriend. The day after Orlando Anderson is killed. According to the ATF agent, Vegas looked at it and said it's not the gun.
Corey Edwards, whose girlfriend the property belonged to, claimed he believed the gun had been planted by Compton PD.
The LAPD got the gun that they said was a match for what was used in Las Vegas. It was a 40 caliber Glock pistol.
It would have had to been planted.
You believe the gun was planted in your girlfriend's backyard. If this gun was planted in your girlfriend's backyard, who would have planted it and why?
Now that was beyond me.
While Suge Knight was in prison following the Tupac incident, he had gotten information that Compton PD had been helping with the takeover of Death Row Records.
For the cops to be able to get away with it, I would have been blamed and sent to prison when they always knew the truth.
Suge Knight, in his 2018 prison interview, claimed what he alleged to have been carried out by Perez had been done so to take over his company.
Where stuff really comes from, it's come from because they want the ownership of my company. That's all that really happened.
The MGM Grand surveillance footage showed Suge Knight kicking Orlando Anderson, which resulted in him violating his probation. Reggie Wright Jr. was found to have been getting information to LAPD Senior Lead Detective Kenneth Knox, which had been about Suge Knight violating his probation.
Clearly, Suge's head of security, Reggie Wright, had 500 million reasons to kill Suge. And according to police reports, there's also evidence that after the shooting, Reggie got word to LAPD that Suge was in violation of his parole for the Orlando Anderson incident in Vegas. which got Suge sent back to the joint and put Reggie in control at death row.
3 days after Tupac's passing, Reggie Wright Jr., through Kevin Lewis, who worked at the studio in Tarzana, had been getting information to the LAPD that Suge Knight had been employing convicted felons and had also been traveling out the country, which violated his probation. David Kenner had submitted the MGM Grand tape into evidence in the probation violation case against Suge Knight. A conflict of interest created by David Kenner between Suge Knight and prosecutor Larry Longo had publicized reports of bribery in the media, which didn't work favorably in Suge's trial. Suge Knight had paid Orlando Anderson upward of $60,000 in order to testify in his defense in court.
Seen me pulling people up on me. That's all I seen.
He paid it off. He gave up $60,000 to say that he didn't do nothing.
Dwayne Davis had said the Compton police had been involved in the meeting to hand over the payment. Orlando Anderson's testimony was unsuccessful, and Suge Knight had been sentenced to 9 years in prison. Death Row Records employees are on record as saying that chaos had broken out of the company, as Suge Knight had not yet signed the company over to a new CEO. Suge had been barred by law from running the company behind bars, and half of the staff had gotten laid off, while creditors such as American Express continued to demand multi-million-dollar payments. Suge, on November 25, 1996, while in prison, had gotten information that the Compton police had put evidence forward to have his probation revoked. Death Row artist Misha Lay had first been made a liaison for the label, where she had been given a stamp to approve dealings. Death Row employees began to complain about her handling of the company, to which Suge then signed it over to Reggie Wright Jr. A Century City News article taking snippets from Kevin Hackey's 1998 interview with Russell Poole and an article from author Kathy Scott in 1997 reads, quote, "Reggie is running the show over there. Since Knight's incarceration, his now estranged wife Sharifa Knight has been taking care of the day-to-day operations of Death Row Records." Unquote. The law firm McPherson and Colemanson had sued Suge Knight under the claims they were cheated out of $600,000 by Death Row in the 90s. The lawsuit claimed Reggie Wright Jr. and David Kenner had been working closely together since Suge Knight's incarceration. Documents show Reggie Wright Jr. had transferred Death Row's 8200 Wilshire Boulevard property over to his name from Suge Knight, with it being done through Misha Lay, with the document not showing Suge Knight's signature to approve the transfer. Suge Knight had a publishing company called Big Simon Says with ASCAP, which had been in a deal with Warner Bros. Reggie Wright Jr. was found to have set up a duplicate company under the same name used for royalties. After Snoop Dogg had acquired Death Row in February of 2022, Death Row's music had been removed from streaming platforms. Former Death Row artist Daz Dillinger, in an interview with Delray Richardson, alleged Snoop Dogg had found Reggie Wright Jr. and a company called Entertainment One were said to have been stealing publishing royalties off of Death Row artists. Reggie Wright Jr. showed paperwork on a duplicate Big Simon Says publishing company, which revealed it had publishing of 14 Tupac songs after his passing. Reggie Wright Jr., when publishing the filings from the royalty company, had redacted the revenue, claiming people would be mad at him at the amount. Suge Knight, when talking to Michael Douglas Carlin, revealed during the time of his probation violation case that distributor Jimmy Iovine of Interscope Records had been making deals with David Kenner for an accounting firm Iovine had introduced them to. Suge Knight stated in a documentary American Dream, American Nightmare, the first thing Jimmy Iovine had said to him after finding out Tupac had passed away had been, "You hit the jackpot. You can't beat a dead man's sales."
When Jimmy Iovine heard, I thought Tupac was dead, right? First thing he said was, "You can't beat a dead man's sales." He said, "You lucky as you didn't hit the jackpot."
Suge Knight, during this time of his probation violation case, had turned over control of his financial accounts and investments to his financial advisors, being David Chesnoff and Steve Steiner, both of whom were serving on a legal team with David Kenner. Suge had revealed in an interview with Michael Douglas Carlin how during this time the accounting firm Jimmy Iovine had introduced them to had stolen between $30 to $40 million off Death Row and had been creating kickback deals between Iovine and Kenner.
I never should have went to prison the first time I went to prison, but I had caught the accounting firm who Jimmy introduced us to. They stole like about $30-40 million, you know, and they was giving David $100,000 a month, and David said he was giving Jimmy a kickback from $100,000 a month.
Over $13 million had been churned out in legal fees going to the law offices of David Kenner. While Suge Knight had been in prison, Biggie had been killed on the West Coast.
Biggie was killed for no other reason than to advance
this theory that the conspirators that had tried to take out Suge Knight were putting forward.
Biggie had gone to Los Angeles in late February of 1997, which had been set up by Puffy, which acted as an early press tour for his upcoming album Life After Death. Puffy had then joined him in early March. Puffy's head of security at the time, Paul Offord, had been connected to Reggie Wright Jr. and Puffy's team had requested if Reggie Wright Jr. could supply them with police security. Reggie Wright Jr. claimed to have known who he referred to as either James McMichaels or James McDaniels, who had been an Inglewood officer for the Unified School District. The officer had approached Reggie to let him know that Bad Boy had requested cops for security. The FBI documents reveal that 5 Inglewood officers had accepted the job to work off duty. 2 of the 5 Inglewood officers had been named as Kenneth Story and Reggie Blaylock. The officers had not been sanctioned by the police department to carry out the work and had been working without permits under private security. The same Inglewood department which had provided the cop security were also responsible for failing to intercept an assassination attempt on Snoop Dogg in 2003, to which numerous officers of the department had been laid off as they had stood down during a shooting on Snoop's motorcade. Sharifa Knight was suing Snoop Dogg, accusing him of failing to pay his agent's commission of $1.6 million, being during a time the Death Row subsidiary Nightlife Management served as his manager. The lawsuit claimed, quote, "Death threats have been reported against the defendant. The defendant's life appears to be in jeopardy," unquote. An LA Weekly writer would say in response to the events that Sharifa Knight wanted her money before Snoop gets shot. The security in the Biggie case, being the Inglewood officers, had been responsible for getting the vehicles for Biggie and Puffy, which had been Suburbans with government chips installed in them, meaning they were unable to reach high speeds. When the trucks would achieve high speeds, a valve in the fuel supply would activate, forcing the trucks to slow down. Biggie's Suburban had notorious big stickers plastered all over it, making it more easier to recognize. Biggie and Puffy had attended a Vibe magazine after party at the Peterson Automotive Museum on March 8th. The party had been shut down by the fire department after midnight. While outside the venue waiting for the Inglewood officers to arrive in their cars, Gene Dale had identified a person in a uniform similar to the Nation of Islam as approaching Puffy. Gene Dale then brandished his weapon to the person, who had been reported as walking off into the direction of the suspect's vehicle. Their Suburban trucks had then arrived, with Puffy's being driven by Inglewood officer Kenneth Story. Biggie's had been the middle car, while Inglewood officer Reggie Blaylock and the head of security Paul Offord had been at the back. A white Toyota Land Cruiser had been reported as trying to intercept the convoy and cut off the security from behind Biggie's vehicle. Gene Dale, during this time in the back of Puffy's car, had told their driver Inglewood officer Kenneth Story to run the red light as a security measure. Gene had identified a black SS Chevy Impala waiting on the corner of the intersection, being in the adjacent lane at the light. Biggie's car had stopped at the red light, to which the white Toyota Land Cruiser pulled up beside in the opposite lane, which had then boxed in Biggie's car between the Toyota and the Chevy Impala. A person in the Impala had then fired into Biggie's truck, hitting him 4 times. Artist Lil Cease, who was in the seat behind Biggie, had identified the shooter as wearing a suit and bow tie similar to the Nation of Islam. Gene Dale believes it had been the same person who had approached them just prior. Gene, in the 2002 documentary Biggie and Tupac, had identified this person as Amir Muhammad from a photo lineup. Amir Muhammad had gone to college with Rampart officer David Mack and had been the godparent to David Mack's children. David Mack had committed a bank robbery in November of 1997. He had stolen $722,000 with the assistance of his girlfriend who had worked at the bank. He was reported as traveling to Las Vegas the following day with Rafael Perez. Mack was arrested for the bank robbery the following month after his girlfriend had given him up. Russell Paul had been handling the case and was on a search of David Mack's home. A black SS Chevy Impala with chrome wheels had been discovered in his garage, which matched the description of the suspect's vehicle. Detectives also found the same ammo type, being Gecko 9mm armor-piercing bullets. Tactical items were also found, including numerous walkie-talkie radios. Biggie's family in April of 2002 had filed a $500 million lawsuit against the LAPD in the city of LA, being based on the evidence which had been found against the officer. Russell Paul's evidence had been put forward in the case, which alleged Rampart cops David Mack and Rafael Perez, as well as Amir Muhammad, had conspired in the murder of Biggie. Rafael Perez, who had been in prison since 1998, had a cellmate called Kenneth Bogney. Bogni was sought after to testify in a civil trial about what Perez was alleged to have told him about the Biggie hit. LAPD officer Stephen Katz, who had been responsible for the Biggie investigation, was found to have been suppressing Kenneth Bogni's testimony by locking it away in his desk, which was subsequently raided. The LAPD were then fined $1.1 million for suppressing a testimony. Bogni had alleged that the 5 officers part of the Rampart clique had been behind the orchestration of the Biggie murder.
Which officers are you saying were implicated in the murder of Biggie Smalls?
David Mack, Sammy Martin, Dirty. You had one other officer that was involved in it, and I keep forgetting his name. Kevin Gaines. So it's 5 officers that was involved in a planning that was going to help execute.
Bogni alleged Perez had told him Mack had hired Amir Muhammad for the hit, claiming he knew him from the past and alleged he had been a hitman for the Nation of Islam. Kenneth Bogni had told journalist Don Sikorsky on the Dossier podcast that Perez was alleged to have told him there had been $1 million bounty out on both Biggie and Puffy, with him saying the cops had been paid $250,000 up front as a deposit. He alleged Perez had told him it had come from Reggie Wright Jr. and David Kenner.
Suge was locked up. When Reggie Wright came to everybody and got the information from Dave Kenner about what they needed to be done.
Bogni had said the cops were promised an additional $750,000, but only if both Biggie and Puffy had been killed. Bogni alleged Perez had told him there had been more than one shooter planned to kill both Biggie and Puffy, but Kevin Gaines failed to intercept the convoy, therefore botching a double hit.
Gaines was supposed to cut both of them off, the officer Gaines. A lot of people don't know that Gaines was seriously involved in this. He was supposed to cut both vehicles off, and the other guy come around and shoot him.
Kevin Gaines had been killed by a fellow cop 9 days after the Biggie murder. Bogni said Perez had told him that David Mack had carried out the bank robbery where he stole $722,000 in order to go and pay Amir Muhammad, as they hadn't been given the additional money due to the botched hit.
But they was also supposed to kill Sean Puffy Combs, and they didn't get it done. So that's why Mack did the bank job in order to pay Amir, because he was going to go after them.
FBI agent Phil Carson in the 2022 series Who Killed Biggie and Tupac had revealed that Biggie and Puffy's entourage, who traveled with them to the Peterson Automotive Museum, had identified David Mack as being at the entrance of the venue when they were entering.
David Mack was identified by witnesses who were part of Biggie's entourage, saw David Mack at the entrance when they went inside with Biggie.
Carson also revealed an LAPD log had showed Rafael Perez had been on the crime scene as a responding officer, where he had been tampering with shell casings.
Rafael Perez was seen picking up shell casings and actually is on a log as an LAPD officer on site.
The FBI files claim the surveillance which had been being carried out on Biggie and Puffy may have the LAPD officers on tape being involved in the crime. Former FBI agent Phil Carson in the 2022 miniseries Who Killed Biggie and Tupac had shown a document from the LAPD Internal Affairs Department which concluded an investigation revealed Mack and Perez were alleged to have conspired in the murder of Biggie. The document revealed that the LAPD had been illegally adjudicated in being not permitted under the federal consent decree and being able to press charges against the officers in the Biggie case.
Wallace murder internal affairs investigation was illegally adjudicated, quote, insufficient evidence to adjudicate, a finding which is not permitted under the federal consent decree, which basically means the LAPD was not allowed to adjudicate and make a determination on it.
The FBI documents claim the cops had used the same tactics in the Biggie crime in a prior crime, but the documents redacted what the crime was.
And the other thing is for Biggie's son, I'm quite sure if they saw the first one, they would saw the second one, because it's the same circle of people, you know?
Author John Potash, in an interview with the Sean Atwood YouTube channel, revealed that Russell Paul had concluded that corrupt LAPD cops were behind the case of Biggie in order to cover up their crime of Tupac.
Russell Paul said his evidence shows that his fellow police officers murdered Biggie in order to cover up their murder of Tupac.
Russell Paul, in a 2002 Biggie and Tupac documentary, claimed he believed cops were involved in both cases and used radios and police scanners to carry out the hits.
Why haven't these cases been solved? One reason that they were well orchestrated, well planned out, radios being used, communication, and had to be experienced police officers, knew exactly what to do.
Russell Poole had dropped dead in the LA County Sheriff's Office, being a department the Compton PD had merged with after being disbanded. Russell Poole had gone there with information of how police may have been being used against Suge Knight. The 2008 government task force to counteract LAPD involvement in the case of Biggie had then, while being headed by LAPD and Compton PD, not only secured the Tupac confession from Dwayne Davis, but also put a new suspect forward in the case of Biggie, being Wardell Pucci Faust, a Compton Mob Piru member. The $500 million lawsuit against the LAPD had then been dropped shortly after. In this video, we took a look into the federal investigation into death row. Kevin Hackey, who went undercover for the investigation, claimed to have seen paperwork which revealed the FBI have both the Tupac and Biggie murders on tape. If so, according to the official narrative, it may show Orlando Anderson carrying out the crime. However, in an alternate theory put forward by Suge Knight and others, it may have Rampart cops on tape carrying out the crime. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section below. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, smash the thumbs up button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and press that bell button so you can get all the future notifications for when I upload. Once again, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.